Dude, this game literally isn't even scary, my guy. Oh shit!
Multiplayer horror games are the funniest games to play, so I made one where you and your friends are special astronauts who retrieve vital research from space stations that had a catastrophic accident. You must collect all the research while repairing the space station and surviving the monster. The catch is I've never made a horror game or a multiplayer game before, but not to worry, the game turned out perfectly. And stay to the end to find out how you can play the game. First up, we make it a Unity project. In order to go from this to this, we are going to need a silly player model, a spooky environment, multiplayer, and illegal species, fun objectives, and events. But what should we start with? For multiplayer games, it's important to start with netcode, because if you try to add multiplayer to a finished game, everything needs to be remade to sync over the network. So let's start with the player model. I opened Blender and made a simple astronaut. And is it just me, or is he looking kinda thick? Now you might be thinking, why does it look so familiar? Well, I stole it from Scary Labor Game and SpaceX. I then brought it into our game and copied the movement and stamina from our boss fight game. I did have to remove the dodge logic and turn it into a first-person script. Our player can now move, but it looks like he's moving by covering himself in baby oil, so we need animations. I started by making this frolicking run animation in Blender, and downloaded 4 walk animations from Mixamo. In third-person games, we only need 1 walk animation because we can rotate the model to face each direction, but for first-person games, constantly rotating the player would be uncontrollable, and probably give you a seizure, so we use a blend tree, which allows us to transition between multiple animations based on a variable such as the direction we're moving. Then after 100 lines of code and 1 animator, our player can now move around. So I forgot to decrease the scale of the Mixamo animation. So now we have a directional walk animation, and I did the same process for the crouch animation. Plus later we'll be adding more animations such as silly emotes. We can now move, but this is going to be a first person game. So I put the camera in the player, but if we look down we can see inside her empty body. To fix this, my first thought was to decapitate the model, saying that probably landed me on a watch list, but this messed up the shadow. So I duplicated the player's model and set the head's render settings to shadow only. This way it doesn't block the camera but also doesn't mess up your shadow. Then I made 2 layers, one for what player model you see and one for what player model others see. It's now time to get the player's flashlight working. I started by building a marvel of engineering and causing a global power outage, then gave the player a light, but it doesn't really look like a flashlight, so I gave it a flashlight texture and made the player's helmet light up, which is done by changing its material with this 1 line of code. I also made the player's upper body rotate where they look, then I made the flashlight sway based on how fast you're moving and gave it a more subtle texture. Wait, what does that say? Subscribe? I also reduced the flashlight intensity when you get close to a wall so you don't get eyeball cancer. The flashlight now looks great, so it's time to create a spooky environment. I started by making a spaceship hallway in Blender, then gave it materials, and you can tell it's a spooky hallway because the walls are dirty and the lights are red. Then I imported it into Unity, but the materials are messed up. This is because the modeling software uses a node-based texture system, and the game engine can't read them. Luckily, we can save our materials as images with a process called baking. After baking 18 materials, we can apply them to our object in Unity, and now we have a decent looking hallway, but we can easily take this to the next level by adding reflections. And let's not stop here. I added spark particles to the wires and smoke particles to the vents. I also made the ship lights flicker, but you will notice it isn't changing the light level of the hallway. This is because the lights have been baked with our reflections. Baked means it's calculated at the start and never again, and only one calculation is great for performance. But to have flickering lights we would need to calculate every frame, and that many calculations would overwork your computer. So instead, we will use Unity's light component, and toggling it on and off gives a very convincing flicker effect, and to make the lights look better, we can add light rays. But there's a problem. We are using Unity's lightweight version for better performance, so special lighting effects aren't built into the engine. The easiest thing to do would be to buy a light ray asset from Unity's asset store, but for 40 bucks I'd have to sell both my kidneys. Instead, I achieved this effect by modeling where I want the light, and giving it a white gradient material. Now our hallway looks great. Remember, when using flickering lights, it's important to keep the values low like this so it doesn't trigger anyone's epilepsy. I also made the light switch functional. Sound design is also super important for horror games, so I got a click sound for the flashlight, and a metal footstep sound for the player, which is given a random pitch and volume to sound less repetitive. Then I got a sound for the vents, a spotlight sound for the light switch, and the subtle buzz of electricity for the lights. Anyways, it is actually important to start with multiplayer, so we must do that next. And multiplayer is one of the hardest mechanics to add to a game. So to make my first time adding multiplayer easier, we are going to be using Mirror. Because instead of worrying about whatever these mean, Mirror allows us to add pre-coded components to synchronize things like the player's position, which gives me more time to prank call Papa John's.
Thank you for calling Papa John's. I can help you.
Hey man, it's free.
Anyways, we still need to test if multiplayer works. So I built the game and sent it to a friend. Then my friend joined. And by friend, I mean my laptop. I wish I had friends. The multiplayer worked, but there were some problems, such as the players being headless and controlled by one person. So I give the players their independence and their head, but now their body's pink. Then I fixed their textures and synced the flashlights being on and off. But the player was holding it with their feet, and after synchronizing the flashlight's position, I was met with our biggest challenge, synchronizing the player's upper body rotation. I gave it a network transform, but that didn't work. So I spent 2 hours trying to synchronize it with code before I remembered I was deactivating the other player's camera, so there wouldn't be 2 cameras in the scene, which is a problem because I put the code and network transform on the camera. Now you're probably thinking, if there's 2 players, shouldn't there be 2 cameras? No. See, multiplayer doesn't work by putting everyone in the same game. Instead, everyone exists in their own world and sends their location and information such as if their flashlight's on to a server. Then the server creates a clone of you for other players with that information. Essentially, whenever you thought you were playing with your friends, you were actually playing with lifeless husks that mimic your friend's actions, kinda like a skinwalker. Anyways, the players bending over now synchronizes. Speaking of skinwalkers, we need a monster. But before we can make the monster, we need to finish the map so the monster is something to move around in. And we are gonna make it procedural for infinite replayability. But there's a problem. We are using pre-built rooms, so if we randomize their position, we might end up trying to place a 10-tile long hallway in an 8-tile gap. Instead, we can make our different rooms the same size, and make a fixed map layout but randomize the rooms we spawn. Plus, we can have different spawn locations, and all of this will lead to lots of map variation without creating gaps or using a complicated algorithm. But the rooms are looking ugly and very similar, so let's change that. I opened Blender and found some reference images. Then I made an oxygen, electrical, reactor, laboratory, navigation, and cafeteria room. Now I know what you're thinking, aren't these just rooms from Imposter game? Anyways, I brought them into Unity and hooked up their textures, reflections, flickering lights, colliders, VFX, and sounds. And some of the rooms went through multiple variations. All of these rooms took about 3 weeks to make, and later we will be adding more rooms. We will also give the rooms special mechanics. For example, there will be power outages, which the electrical room can fix, which is a unique mechanic that has never been seen before. Is that an imposter? Speaking of imposters, we still need a monster. I started by adding the scariest monster that I could find to our game, the graph of illegal border crossings, but don't get too attached to it, because later we will be modeling a new monster from scratch. Because we finished 6 rooms, we have enough of the map done to make our monster's pathfinding. We are going to be using Unity's nav mesh system, which works by telling Unity what part of the map is walkable, and after a simple movement script, the graph of illegal border crossings can now follow us around the map. But right now, the graph is embracing its origins by going through objects it's not supposed to. To fix this, we also need to tell Unity what's not walkable, and now our monster can move around the map without entering objects. But right now, our monster is constantly chasing the player, which is boring. So we are going to give our monster 3 new states. Find is the monster's default state. If he hasn't found a player yet, he will move to random rooms. Stalk is for when the monster finds a player and they haven't found him. He will sneak up behind the player, and if the player turns around, he will stop just out of view. In order for the monster to find players, he needs to be able to see and hear them. But video games don't have eyes or ears, so instead we send a raycast from the monster to the player, which is really just a line, but it can tell us what objects it's hitting. So if it hits the player, we can tell the monster it can see them. To make the monster hear the player, we give the player's actions a number for how loud they are, and add up the actions the player is currently doing. Then if the monster's distance to the player is less than how loud the player is, we tell the monster it can hear them. We also don't want the monster to instantly forget seeing a player the moment they go behind a wall or stop making noise, so we add players to a list when the monster sees or hears them, and remove them after 5 seconds if they aren't seen or heard again. If you're on the list, the monster knows where you are. Chase is when the player sees the monster stalking them. The monster will stop stalking and start chasing the player. Search is when the monster loses sight of the player when chasing them. If this happens, the monster will move to random positions around where he last saw the player. The AI for the monster ended up being 1,000 lines of code. And if you're curious how AI is made for boss fights, I made a boss fight in the last video, which I will link at the end so you can easily watch it afterwards. Now that our monster's AI is done, we need a scary model. So I opened Blender, and our monster is going to be a centipede, because feet are scary. Later, we're gonna make it look 10 times better, but for now we need something simple to create a procedural animation with. A normal animation involves chaining together different positions of a model. A procedural animation uses physics to animate the model while the game is being played, which would allow us to make walk animations that bend the model as it turns corners, which looks more realistic than a normal animation. Unity makes this easy with its stamped transform component, which does all the physics for us, and it's starting to look pretty broken actually. Anyways, I got it working, and also created a normal animation for the legs, since the legs don't need to deform. Now that our procedural animation is finished, we need to fix our terrible model, so I made him thick and scary. It did take a couple of attempts to make the new model. I brought the new model into Unity and hooked up the AI and animations, then made a new animation for when the monster gets the player. I also created a particle effect, and I don't want to get demonetized, so the effect is barely noticeable. Since our player can peacefully go to heaven, we need a spectate system, which is done by creating a list of the alive player's cameras, then deactivating certain components on the dead player such as their player model, and allowing the dead player to switch between cameras in the live player list. Then I give our centipede monster a ton of sound effects. Remember when I said, for example, there will be power outages which the electrical room can fix. Let's add it. After a random amount of time, a random sabotage will start. And by random, I mean electrical. We'll add more later. When electrical is picked, all the lights turn off and can't be turned on. To make this more obvious, the light switch now turns green when the player can press it, stays green when turned on, and stays red during the electrical sabotage. The player also gets a warning message with a glitchy red texture. Then I made the power box door in the electrical room openable, and put a bunch of buttons in it. A random amount of these buttons will be red and the player will need to press them. It's also important you finish before the timer, because if you don't... Now is this just the electrical minigame from Among Us with 10 times more switches? Yes. It's now time to make your game winnable. So I made the procedural map script always spawn 5 research rooms. Then I made the tubes of super important sciencey stuff collectible, and you can place them in your ship, which is a new room that spawns randomly on the outside of the map. It's also the room where you will start the game from, and I made sure it's packed with only the most important supplies, lotion and tissues. If you bring all the tubes of super important sciencey stuff back to your ship, you win, which is just a line of text because I haven't uploaded a video in 5 months, so I gotta wrap this up real quick. I made a lobby where you and the boys can get jiggy before pressing the button to start the game, then added a space skybox with a sun that has a slight glare effect. I also made some images for the screen in the ship, and now we have a tutorial. Then I made a system to send everybody back to the lobby when everybody's dead, and also a settings menu. One of my friends said the attack animation was too slow, so I shortened the start of the animation. Now it's finally time to play our game. Yo, what up?
Yeah.
Oh shit, oh shit.
Gotta go.
No, I'm stuck. Oh, I escaped him. Nice, he placed it in there. Oh no, the power went out.
It's okay.
Oh, get to clicking. Get to clicking. Holy shit. One more. Yes, sir. Dude, the amount of buttons there was like 6, 7. Nice, we got 4 out of the 5.
Yeah, we haven't seen the monster for a while, not gonna lie.
Dude, nah, it's okay. I'll add a goon corner to keep the viewers entertained. Alright, put it in. Look at the sick victory we get. Isn't that sick?
Are we dead ass?
Victory dance. Yes, sir. Next video, I'll be adding proximity chat, items, more rooms, more enemies, more sabotages, and much more. So if you don't want to miss that, make sure to subscribe. And if you have a computer and want to play the game, there's a link to download it in the description. If you enjoyed this video, then you'll love this video where we make a boss fight.